KTCU FM Fort Worth. You've made it to the end of another long work week. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a few guys talking sports for the next hour. This is Friday Night Sports. Here's Ben Otten, James Flowers, and Mitchell LaFave.
Welcome to Friday Night Sports. I'm Ben Otten, and tonight we're going to switch it up a little bit. James and I are going to switch roles, so with that in mind, I'll send it right over to James.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Welcome to another hour of Friday Night Sports. I'm James Flowers, and with me are Ben Otten and Mitchell LaFave. It's hard to believe that this is our 13th episode, but every week is different and fun nonetheless. Let's get right to the show, fellas. Recapping last week, Oklahoma State went on the road to take on the Cyclones of Iowa State. Oklahoma State won 49-42. This was a typical Big 12 game, as some people would say. A lot of offense and not a lot of defense. With the win, Oklahoma State has kept their Big 12 championship hopes alive. Do you think we'll see Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game in December?
You know, it all really falls on the shoulders of TCU. You know, right now they both have Oklahoma and TCU both have the head-to-head record over Oklahoma State, and because TCU has the same record as Oklahoma State as of right now, really all depends on how TCU does the rest of the season. Because of the head-to-head, if they end with the same records, TCU is going to get that Big 12 championship game.
But I think if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you've got to still keep your hopes up. I mean, this is a very realistic shot for them to get another rematch at Oklahoma in the Big 12 title game. I wouldn't be surprised to see a rematch of Bedlam at all. I mean, right now, obviously, TCU, as you said, Mitch, holds that number 2 spot, but gosh, we've been hit hard with injuries of late. We don't know if Kenny Hill's going to be able to play. Obviously, Darius Anderson's done for the year. On the defensive side, Traven Howard, Montrell Wilson, Nico Small, they're all questionable for Texas Tech on the road, which is surely not a gimme. And then at home against Baylor, who albeit is a team that only has one win, but it's a rivalry game, so anything can happen. On the flip side, you look at Oklahoma State, they get 2 home games against Kansas State and Kansas. That's a much more favorable schedule. This offense is cooking again for Oklahoma State. Mason Rudolph found his groove again. Justice Hill is a man on the mission. He's been almost unstoppable for running the ball for Oklahoma State. I really wouldn't be all that surprised if Oklahoma State gets ahead of TCU and ends up in that number 2 spot in the Big 12 and gets to the first Big 12 title game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really TCU for sure controls its own destiny, and Oklahoma State does too, in a sense. They didn't really help themselves out earlier in the season with a tough loss against TCU, but Cowboys nonetheless certainly need some help. If TCU loses to Texas Tech or Baylor, and if Oklahoma State wins out, which is certainly possible, I wouldn't be surprised either to see a Bedlam rematch. I think that could be really fun, and that'll be at AT&T Stadium on in the first week of December. So as for this game specifically, Oklahoma State really fell behind early, didn't get much production from James Washington because he left with a lingering injury, but that forced other players to step up. Marcel Aitman, four catches, 97 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jalen McCleskey, 5 catches, 109 yards. And Justice Hill, continuing his great season, 25 rushes, 134 yards and 3 touchdowns. So big game from Oklahoma State. Iowa State really kept with them, but that last play turned into Oklahoma State interception. A bit controversial from what I could see. It looked like an interception to me, but Iowa State fans, of course, a little bit biased there.
Yeah, I thought that for Oklahoma State, from the defensive standpoint, they weren't great. You get 42 points to an Iowa State offense that hasn't been great all season. I mean, obviously, and Kyle Kemp, their backup quarterback, as a matter of fact, went down. Iowa State was down to their 3rd-string quarterback, a true freshman in Zeb Nolan. He played well, but still, the defense wasn't great, but it got stops when it mattered. I thought that's the key. That's about all you can ask for from this Cowboy defense. They did enough to give Oklahoma State a chance to win.
Yeah, and that's exactly all you ask for if you're Oklahoma State. A close game in Ames between Oklahoma State and Iowa State, but the same cannot be said for Georgia at Auburn. The Tigers handily beat the Dogs 40-17. Certainly a convincing win by the Tigers, holding the Bulldogs to just 230 yards of total offense. We've seen how good Auburn can be. Is it possible for a two-loss team like the Tigers to make the college football playoff?
You know, if they can beat Alabama at the end of the season, it's going to be hard to be able to ignore Auburn. I don't know if that also puts them in the SEC championship game.
It would.
It would. So, I mean, if they can beat Georgia again, then I don't think there's any way that you could keep Auburn out of the top 4 because they would have beaten 2 number 1 teams at that time. And, their loss to Clemson right now is looking better and better thanks to the committee. So that's helping them too.
Yeah, and the other losses at is away to an LSU team who, albeit isn't a great team, but is ranked, and it was only by 4 points. Also, the thing Auburn has going for them is those were 2 early season losses. They've looked better and better each week, and if you factor in not just this past week beating number 1 Georgia, they get Alabama at home, who's number 1 right now, beat them, and then like Mitch said, Georgia again in the SEC championship. I mean that those are marquee wins. I don't think the committee would be able to ignore that, and I certainly think Alabama's got a shot if they win out.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think it's very possible. We've seen that the committee values big wins, and the perfect example of that is Clemson beating Louisville on the road when Louisville was ranked, knocked off Virginia Tech and Blacksburg, and beat NC State and Raleigh. So 3 quality wins for Clemson is more valuable than a road loss at Syracuse. And I even saw today that the committee looked at the Clemson-Syracuse game and really cited the injury to Kelly Bryant as a reason for that loss. I'm not sure if I totally agree with that, or I don't think there's any excuses there. But back to Georgia and Auburn, I think really for Auburn, I think they could use some help in front of them for sure to kind of lock up a spot. Wisconsin losing would for sure help. They've got to be careful on who wins out in the Big Ten, though. If it's Ohio State, they could very well jump in the top 4 as a 2-loss team as well. So certainly many things to look for in the coming weeks as the college football season winds down.
Yeah, the thing for me with Ohio State is, I mean, yes, they're going to be a Big Ten champion, but Auburn would be a conference champion as well. And when you look at losses, Iowa State got smacked by Iowa. I mean, it was on the road, but that was not even a competitive game at all. You look at Auburn's losses, they're much closer, all within single digits. I'd like to think Auburn would get the upper hand over Ohio State.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the committee's going to have a tough decision there, but either way, both teams need to win out to have a shot. I would say Auburn's probably in a better spot there, but Auburn's victory propelled them into the college football playoff picture and really set up a great matchup in the Iron Bowl in a couple of weeks against Alabama. And speaking of the Tide, it was another close call for the Crimson Tide this week. They escaped Starkville with another win. They beat Mississippi State 31-24, but it was really not in convincing fashion. Alabama's back at number 1 in the rankings, assuming they beat Mercer this week. If they lose to Auburn in the Iron Bowl, where do their national championship and playoff hopes lie?
I mean, it's tough because that would only be 1 loss for them. But at the same time, it's a loss late in the season. It takes you out of a conference championship opportunity. I mean, those 2 things really would hurt Alabama. I know it's so weird to say. We're talking about these. We're just talking about two loss teams like Auburn and Ohio State possibly getting in. Then Alabama, just 1 slip up on the road against a really good Auburn team, and I really don't know that they would be in if they were to lose that game. Obviously, they're going to have to play a lot better than they did against Mississippi State. I said last week that Mississippi State had potential because of how Nick Fitzgerald plays, the fact that he's a true dual threat quarterback. But, I mean, he played a lot better than I thought he would, and the Alabama defense looks beatable for the first time in probably a long time.
Yeah, I think it doesn't really help Alabama that they're so battered on the defensive side. They'll probably get Christian Miller back and Terrell Lewis. They'll be back soon. Nick Saban said it looks like Christian Miller will be back for the Auburn game, and as for Lewis, still kind of up in the air. But they play Mercer this week. We assume that'll be a win. Can't assume anything, but it should be a guaranteed win, and that should give this Alabama really the battered secondary some chance at a rest. As for the offense, average day from Jalen Hurts as usual. Calvin Ridley had another great game. 5 catches for 171 yards and a touchdown. He is so fun to watch because he's so explosive. And whenever he gets his hands on the ball, you never know. It really could go all the way to the end zone. So, but certainly another close win. But Alabama really, for them, they just need to win out. And this Iron Bowl, it looks like it's going to be a great matchup.
Yeah, I think you make a good point talking about Calvin Ridley. That's really given Jalen Hurts and this offense a big boost because in the past, these great Alabama teams, albeit they pride themselves on defense, but offensively, it seems like they've always had a guy at receiver, someone that is just elite and always makes plays. I think of guys like Amari Cooper, Julio Jones in the past that have done that and propelled Alabama to national titles. Calvin Ridley looks like he's going to be that guy, and the guys that they have around him, the trio of running backs with Bo Scarborough, Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris. You add that to what Jalen Hurts can give you on the ground. Their offense isn't really the problem. It's the defense because they've been battered with injuries, like you said.
Yeah, and just going back to Calvin Ridley, Jalen Hurts not the best quarterback. 10 of 18. He was 10 of 18. Did have 242 yards. Again, not the best passer. Really helps that you've got a good receiver and Ridley like that. And again, Jalen Hurts is doing a good job of not turning the ball over on offense. But like you guys mentioned, the defense is going to be their biggest challenge going forward.
What does he have, like one interception? That's insane.
Something like that.
Well, as long as Alabama won, they would still be in the running for the number one ranking in the college football playoff rankings, and that's exactly what happened. And Notre Dame would also need to win if they wanted to stay at number 3, but the Fighting Irish could not follow suit as they got blown out on the road in Coral Gables, 41-8. A gritty performance by the Canes this week at home, with Notre Dame out of their way and their path clear to the ACC title game. Do you envision Miami being in the college football playoff at the end of the season?
I mean, obviously if they can go undefeated, they're going to be there for sure. If they lose, who knows? Again, it depends on, how Auburn does the rest of the season, if they can win out, if Oklahoma can win out. There's just so many teams that are up in the rankings that can make that final push for a spot. It's hard. It's going to be hard to tell, if Miami does not win in the ACC title game. But if they do, you obviously got to put them there.
Yeah, I personally think they have to win. I think Miami has to win the ACC Conference Championship to get in. That would require beating Clemson, and I just don't know that Miami can do that. This Clemson team does not turn the ball over. Miami's got that whole turnover chain thing. It really they really pride themselves on turnovers, and that really fuels them. The offense isn't great. Clemson's defense is so good. It's tough for me to see a way Clemson or Miami could beat Clemson, but obviously if Miami runs the table and goes unbeaten, wins the ACC, they'd have to be in, probably as a 1 or a 2 seed.
Yeah, I would think so as well. They sit number 4 right now in the college football playoff. Have Oklahoma at number 3 and Wisconsin trailing them at number 5. So certainly close. But as for this game itself, for the Miami offense, it was really all about the run game. Travis Homer's just done an incredible job filling in for Mark Walton. I think when Walton got injured, we sort of doubted the Canes and Travis Homer, citing that Miami wouldn't be able to run the ball as effectively, but that's exactly what they did on Saturday night. The Canes racked up 237 yards on the ground between 3 different players. I think DJ Dallas is going to be really good in a few years. He's the freshman, of course, taking advantage of his opportunities with the injury to Walton. So really just a great performance all around by the Canes.
Also, Malik Rozier had 3 interceptions last week against Virginia Tech. Just, I think, 1 against Notre Dame this past week. That was a big difference, too. Miami not turning the ball over.
Yeah. And speaking of turnovers, Notre Dame had plenty themselves. We talked about Notre Dame's run game, and if Miami could stop the run game, they'd have a chance, and that's exactly what they did. They forced Brandon Wimbush to throw the ball, something he's not as comfortable with, and they made him pay, throwing 2 interceptions, ended the night with a QB rating of 5.7. So I really think this Miami defense is for real. We've seen them for 2 weeks now dominate solid offenses in Notre Dame and Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I remember when we were watching it, every time we'd flip back over to the game in between our game, it just seemed like Miami had the ball every time, just getting those turnovers, forcing Notre Dame off the field. Just really, really solid by Miami for sure.
Yeah, kind of seemed like Oklahoma had the ball a lot in the TCU game as well. So as we flip between the two, but we'll cover that one in a little bit. For now, we'll go with our performance of the week. Mitch, we'll start with you.
I hate to say it, but my player of the week is Oklahoma's Rodney Anderson. We'll get to that game in a moment, like you said, but the running back had 151 yards on the ground with 2 rushing touchdowns, and then added another 139 receiving yards with another 2 touchdowns in the Sooners' victory over the Horned Frogs this past weekend.
Yeah, for me, it's the Ohio State running game. I couldn't pick between Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins because they both had huge games, but this Buckeye team 1 week removed from a beatdown at Iowa that I talked about earlier. It likely ended the Buckeyes' national championship hopes. Obviously, they still have an outside shot at it, but this running attack put it on number 12 Michigan State. As I said, sophomore running back Mike Weber had 9 carries for 162 yards, 2 touchdowns. True freshman J.K. Dobbins, who looks like the real deal, had 18 carries for 124 yards. J.T. Barrett also contributed. It was a 3-headed attack as Ohio State just dominated Michigan State, and it was really, I don't think anyone saw it coming. Michigan State not let a player rush for more than 67 yards coming into the game. Weber and Dobbins both crossed the century mark on the ground, and Ohio State got back to their winning ways.
And my performance of the week is Malcolm Perry, the running back and now quarterback for Navy. Navy lost 3 in a row going into this weekend's home matchup against SMU. The midshipmen knew that they needed to get back onto the winning track if they wanted to go to a bowl game for the 14th time in 15 seasons. Ken Niumatalolo had Perry play all season in the slot back position to go with their triple option offense. Junior quarterback Zach Abey injured his shoulder last week in the loss at Temple, so Niumatalolo turned to Malcolm Perry to start his first game at quarterback. Perry ran the ball 33 times for 282 yards as he accounted for over half of the Mid's yards on offense. With a gutsy first performance, Perry earned American Athletic Conference Offensive Player of the Week honors and My Performance of the Week. So a crazy weekend of college football results in a mix-up in the college football playoff rankings this week. Alabama jumps to number 1, Clemson at number 2, Oklahoma number 3, Miami at number 4, Wisconsin at number 5, Auburn jumps to number 6, Georgia falls to number 7, Notre Dame at number 8, Ohio State at number 9, and Penn State at number 10, and TCU falls out of the top 10 to number 12. Guys, any disagreements on that, or would you change anything?
I've got some every week. So,
I mean, I don't know. I think, again, Clemson, I don't think that they should be at the number 2 spot. Clemson and Oklahoma both have the same record, both 1 loss. And, while the committee, they say they value big wins, Oklahoma has 3 wins against teams in the top 15, against Ohio State, TCU, and Oklahoma State. Clemson, they've only got 1 win against a top 15 team, and that's Auburn. And again, their road loss is a lot worse. So I don't personally see why Clemson can be at number 2 and Oklahoma at number 3.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about this, a lot of people have said, it doesn't matter. Everything will take care of itself. Well, that's not true. This does matter. This is our only way of knowing what the College Football Playoff Committee values. So it's important that we look at these rankings and talk about them and disagree with them and argue with them, because the committee should know that that people disagree with what they're valuing or what they say they're valuing and how those values reflect in the rankings. Like you said, Mitch, I don't think Clemson should be number 2. I think Oklahoma should be there. As I go further down this list, I would flip Notre Dame and Ohio State personally. I think Notre Dame's a team just struggling of late. Ohio State looked really good against number 12 Michigan State last week, so that's a pretty big win for them. I'd flip those 2, but again, that's one of the things that will probably take care of itself eventually. Outside of the top 10, where is UCF? I know
15.
Yeah, I know they don't play anyone good, but you're telling me there are 14 teams that have performed better than an undefeated UCF team. Also, the AAC, the only argument against it I've heard is that the AAC is not a Power 5 conference. Well, that's true, but they're not that far off. They're right there. They're just one small step below Power 5 conferences. It was a different argument last year with Western Michigan because they're in the MAC, and that's just another step down in terms of competition in your conference. The AAC is not a joke of a conference. UCF plays legitimate football teams every week, and I just don't think they get nearly enough love.
And again, it's not a Power 5 conference, but when you're undefeated, you're undefeated. It's hard to do in college football, and it's just that is also a good point. I don't know why they're still so far down.
Yeah, going back to the Clemson thing, the only argument I've heard that favors Clemson is that they have 6 wins on teams that have an above 500 record, and I did fact check that, and that is true. And I never really thought the ACC was that strong of a conference. I think it kind of fluctuates sometimes, and it's a solid conference. I'll give it that on the football side, but I agree with you guys. I don't think they should be at number 2. But again, they value the big wins and the multiple wins, and they seem to value that Louisville win more and more. But as we go through the season, Louisville is just not very good. So I'm not even sure if I'd count that. And as to UCF, I totally agree. I think they should be higher. Their offense is lights out. They really, I don't think they've had maybe 2 close games. They beat teams by double digits. It seems like week in, week out.
Yeah.
And
it's a little different from like what Wisconsin's doing. I mean, Wisconsin's in the Big Ten. I'm not taking anything away from what they've done. They're also impressive. I think they should be in the top 4 personally. But again, like you said, UCF is these aren't close wins. Like these are big time. They're winning easily just about every week. But I want to go back to something you said about Clemson. It's so interesting how when you look at what the committee has to say, why is Clemson 2 instead of Oklahoma or Miami? They're talking about how, well, they beat Auburn, who just beat number 1 Georgia, and how they're number 6 in the country now. But then you also factor in the fact that they beat Louisville on the road when Louisville was ranked. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, they beat Louisville on the road when Louisville was good, and so that's an important win, and then say that, well, they beat Auburn, who is now a good team, so that's a good win. It's got to be one way or the other. It's got to be how good they were when you played them, or how good the team you beat is now. You can't have it both ways. It's something I don't agree with. I think you could look at other teams, and it's the same case for them.
yeah, I totally agree. I think there is a little bit of inconsistency there, and just not enough clarity. I think they try to give their best explanation week in, week out, but sometimes it just doesn't really make sense to us. So certainly not everyone's going to agree, but as for this week, that's how it stands. A bit of a slow week in college football. We'll preview that coming up. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will recap TCU at Oklahoma, and Ben will give his thoughts on this season's college basketball season so far.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I was sensitive to lights and sounds, so I built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. Sometimes I do the same things over and over, until one day I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Are you or a loved one unable to lead a healthy lifestyle because your physical ailments prohibit you from making nutritious meals for yourself? Do you find that you eat out for every meal because it's too difficult to cook? Well, get excited, because you can kiss fast food goodbye. Meals on Wheels delivers nutritionally balanced meals to the elderly and disabled citizens of Tarrant County. Wait, it gets even better. Each meal is made with love because each client gets their own professional case manager who prepares meals and recipes that specifically meet each client's personal health needs. You're probably thinking to yourself, this sounds great, but what's the catch? I'm here to tell you that there is no catch. Eligibility for these meal services are based on need. Help and health are just a few clicks away. For more information, call 817-336-0912. From there, a case manager will set up a time for a home visit and assessment. You're on your way to healthy living. For Meals on Wheels, call 817-336-0912.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports. TCU went to Norman and came back with their tails between their legs, a 38-20 loss. Really a tough game all around, but the biggest problem for the Horned Frogs was a number of injuries that happened in the game. Darius Anderson is done for the year. The right foot injury. Kenny Hill, Traven Howard, Nico Small, and Montrell Wilson are all listed as questionable for Saturday's game at Texas Tech. As for the week's game at Oklahoma, though, what happened on Saturday night?
It's the week before Oklahoma, they came off a good win, a shootout against Oklahoma State. A lot of offense in that game. They were saying Oklahoma made a change in their defense. They decided to start three freshmen?
True freshmen.
Three true freshmen over their initial defensive backs, and that made a huge difference. Couple big plays for TCU at the beginning of the game, but Oklahoma's secondary did an absolutely fantastic job against TCU this past weekend.
Yeah, and on the flip side, they ran into the best player in college football, Baker Mayfield. And there was talk going into this game, it was great matchup when Baker Mayfield had the ball. Oklahoma offense, how good they played, scoring 62 points a week ago, and how good this TCU defense had been over the past couple of weeks and even over the course of the year. Well, unfortunately, great offense beats great defense, and that's just exactly what Baker Mayfield did. He was 18 of 27, 333 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Just an all-around outstanding performance from probably the Heisman frontrunner right now.
Yeah, the storyline, as you said, going into the game was that great offense and the great defense, and I thought it would start out a little bit better, maybe a little bit more even. The unfortunate thing for TCU was the defense was on the field for the entire first half. It seemed like just TCU early on could get something going, but just couldn't get enough going. Kenny Hill really, I thought he looked pretty good early. Struggled later on down the game. Those true freshmen really they stepped up, and give credit to them. It seemed like the broadcasters early on were a little bit worrisome, but they made plays and they really rattled Kenny Hill, and he really couldn't do much, and the rest of the TCU offense for that matter. Kenny Hill just under 50% his completion percentage, threw for 270 yards. The run game racked up 155 yards, but key loss was Darius Anderson, as I said earlier, done for the year. So the offense really struggling against that young secondary for Oklahoma.
Yeah, the offense just wasn't the same after Darius Anderson's injury. I thought just got a little too past that, which is understandable when you lose your top running back. Kenny obviously got off to a good start, but after Darius Anderson went down, it's really tough to see him gone for the rest of the season. But you could see it immediately how important he is to this offense.
Yeah, and going back to the other side with the TCU defense and Baker Mayfield, it was really frustrating to watch because it seemed like whatever the defense tried to do, Baker Mayfield was able to get away from it. They would either, the TCU would blitz to try and get a lot of pressure on him, and he'd either escape the pocket or find some guy real fast, or, TCU wouldn't rush enough guys, and Baker Mayfield would have all day in the pocket, and he'd still find a guy, and that was just really frustrating. But give credit to Baker Mayfield and the Oklahoma offensive line. They just were unstoppable.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I thought coming into this game, it was so important. The front four of TCU had to get pressure. You have to get pressure with Form Baker Mayfield. They say the same thing where Tom Brady, not trying to make that comparison, but you get the idea. You can't afford to blitz a guy like Baker Mayfield because he's too good, and he's just almost even better against a blitz, and he'll just beat you with chunk plays. If you sit back in coverage, don't get pressure, he's got it all day, his receivers will eventually get open, and Mayfield can make all the throws. So you have to get pressure with the front four. You have to frustrate him dropping 7 guys in coverage, and TCU was just unable to do that. This front four for TCU is really good, so I give a lot of credit to this Oklahoma offensive line. Even when TCU blitzed, it seemed like they didn't get a lot of pressure on Mayfield. That was just so impressive to see from the Sooners offensive line. And
it didn't help for TCU that Matt Boesen got ejected pretty early on in the game. It was really tough for us to see because the camera didn't really pick it up. But, from the looks of it, it just seemed like he was trapped under a couple guys. It was just pretty much flailing. That's what, we saw from the pan of the camera. Could have been a different story. Could have, actually been aggressively kicking at the Oklahoma guys. But we'll never know. But, not saying it was a game changer, but it definitely did not help.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the defense. I didn't really understand the Matt Boesen call, but I can't give a true opinion until I see the entire tape, which I'm not sure I will. So, as for that, and with Baker Mayfield, I mean, he deserves a lot of credit. That's just a testament to how good of an athlete he is. It might not be the most genuine guy off the field or sometimes on the field, but his ability certainly speaks for itself, and he showed that. And the TCU defense, as I said, and as we all kind of said, didn't play that well in the first half. I think they were just getting frustrated. And when you play a guy like Baker Mayfield, it's easy to get frustrated. They looked better in the second half, and I think part of that was really because of Oklahoma taking their foot off the gas, which head coach Lincoln Riley admitted to doing. But it was just too big of a hole for the offense to climb out of going down 38-14 at half. Ben, I want to go back to something you said with the play calling, and they got really pass happy, and I noticed that too. And I will say I really didn't like it. I know Darius Anderson was out, but you've got Kyle Hicks, who he's not bad. He's been your main back for the past couple of years.
Past year.
Okay, yes, year plus.
Yeah.
And then and when they ran the ball, especially with Darius Anderson, because he got injured a little bit later on in the game. He was really gaining chunky yardage, 6-7 yards of run, maybe not quite that many every time, but if that works, why not use it every time? Then when you force Kenny Hill to throw the ball a lot, which we haven't seen that much this season, the corners seem to do a good enough job reading it or playing the ball, and it really wasn't working. So I didn't know what the game plan was going into this game, but whatever they displayed, I can't say I was too big of a fan.
Yeah, I said it before the game, too. The best way to stop Oklahoma's and this offense is to stay on the field and keep Baker Mayfield on the sidelines. You do that by running the ball. I understand why he went away from it because Darius Anderson was just so good, and then he goes down. I mean, this next guy up, Kyle Hicks, is an effective runner, but he was not getting the kind of yards Darius Anderson was getting on a consistent basis. That being said, I mean, you make a good point, James. I would have liked to have seen Sonny Cumbie in this offense stay committed to the running game, take some pressure off Kenny Hill, especially with the way the Oklahoma secondary was playing. 3 true freshmen, you wouldn't have known it. They were really good. I think you got to give Oklahoma some credit for what they did defensively.
You know, it doesn't help that TCU was down at that point, you know, however much it was, more than 18. But so, you know, Kenny Hill, he's not the best deep passer by any means. And when you're down by that much and, you know, play calling wants you to start throwing it deeper, and he's not as comfortable as he is, you know, making those shorter passes, the checkdowns, the out routes, it just was not helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the injuries from this game and from previous games are going to start catching up to TCU. Luckily, center Patrick Morris will be back for limited duties on Saturday, and that is a welcome return for Patrick Morris since Austin Slotman just seems like he keeps shooting TCU in the foot multiple times, lots of penalties, not as many this game as the week before against Texas. It just seemed like every flag was going his way, so maybe it'll be a welcome return for Austin Slotman as well. And Jonathan Song was unable to kick on Saturday. I've heard a few different things. One is that he didn't feel great on Thursday, couldn't even try to kick on Saturday with a pulled groin, so we'll see how that kind of affects him in the future. I believe it was Ryan Graff who went out for the extra point on one of the touchdowns, or went out for a field goal.
Bunce went for the extra point, and right. Graff went for the field goal.
Yes, and Graff went for the field goal, and was it a 5-yard penalty to knock him back?
He made it, and then
he made it. I thought it was a timeout.
No, he made it. We got a 5-yard penalty for a false start or too many men on the field or something like that, and moved the field goal back. I mean, it was still a makeable field goal the second time around, but then he missed, and I thought that was just a big turning point in the game as well.
Yeah, and at that point, it was still a relatively close game, and I'm not blaming the kicking game by any means, but they got to figure that out this weekend. You figure TCU is going to score some points, and as is Texas Tech, because this defense is injured, and Texas Tech offense is pretty explosive. So they will hopefully figure out the kicking game. Hopefully Jonathan Song is good to go. Right now, we'll kind of switch gears a little bit. Ben is going to give us his thoughts on college basketball season so far. We know TCU has gotten started, but what is the rest of college basketball world looking at?
Yeah, I'll get to TCU in a second. I'm sure you two guys know. I'll let everyone else know. It's my favorite time of the year. Big-time college basketball fan, so I'll start with the two biggest games of the season so far. Champions Classic on Tuesday night. Number 1 Duke beat number 2 Michigan 88-81. For me, Duke looks like the real deal. Senior point guard Grayson Allen is leading a bunch of uber-talented freshmen. They are outstanding, very deep. It's been really fun to watch this Duke team play. Michigan State also looked very solid. Miles Bridges was held in check the whole night, and the Spartans hung around. So I think those are two teams you'll see again make a deep run in March. In the nightcap of that Champions Classic, number 4 Kansas beat number 7 Kentucky. Or TCU fans in particular, Kansas is beatable this year. The Big 12 still goes through Lawrence. It has for the past 12, 13 years now. But teams like West Virginia, TCU, they're preseason 2 and 3 in the Big 12. They have a shot to knock off Kansas and end that long run of consecutive Big 12 titles. As for Kentucky on the flip side, John Calipari's got a problem. This is not only the youngest group he's ever coached, the average age of their team is 18 and a half years old, which is younger than the three of us. And I also think this is the least talented group he's ever coached, in my opinion. They have a lot of length, a lot of athleticism. It gives them potential defensively, but Kevin Knox is the only guy who can score offensively. Coach Cal, he's had some difficulties, not difficulties, he's had to face some difficulties with teams in the past, but I think this is his biggest test. It'll really show how good of a coach he is if Kentucky can turn it around and look like a national championship contending team. On a more local level, I mentioned TCU a little bit earlier. Quick rundown of their season so far. They're 3-0. An impressive win unimpressive win over UL Monroe in the opener, 83-73. Looked much better against Tennessee Tech on Monday night, winning 100-63. And I thought the South Dakota game on this past Wednesday, TCU obviously won 76-71, but it was a good early season test. I don't think TCU realized how good of a team South Dakota is. They have a really good team. You'll probably see South Dakota again in March, as they'll probably win their conference. Guys like Matt Mooney, who had 31 points, Tyler Hagenman, who had 23 points. South Dakota's a really good team. I thought TCU responded well to a slow start in that game. As for TCU, I know Coach Dixon wants to go 9 or 10 deep. This team, though, needs a true leader on the offensive end. They have a lot of balance scoring, but no one's really great. Guys like Desmond Bain, Alex Robinson, Vladimir Brodziansky have the potential to become the go-to scorers, but they have to demand the ball, be consistent over the course of the season. We see what that does. If you were watching the South Dakota game on Wednesday night, Matt Mooney, who was their go-to scorer, had 31 points. He kept South Dakota in it the entire 40 minutes. That's what can happen if you have an elite scorer. You can hang around with just about anybody in college basketball. At TCU, I would like to see them find that. If they can, this Horned Frogs team gets a lot better, and it'll be interesting to see how the season pans out for the Horned Frogs.
It seems like TCU has a lot of youth on their side, a fairly young team. Obviously, Vladimir Brodziansky, his last season really came on strong, and he's seemed like he's stepped into a leadership role in this season so far. Desmond Bain is only a sophomore, and a couple of young freshmen getting game time early. We'll see how much game time they get later on in the season as conference play begins. But so far, looking pretty good. Could they make a run in the Big 12? I know it's a tough basketball conference, but they've improved. Other teams seem to have improved. So
it's a conference on the down, I would say.
Really?
Kansas is not as good as they've been in the past. West Virginia is going to be really good. They did not look good in their opener against Texas A&M, but it's still so early. This team will turn around because they've got two senior guards who just fit Coach Huggins' play style at West Virginia. They're scrappy, aggressive, really good defenders. Press Virginia, as they're known, they will be back in full effect. But you look around the conference, Iowa State's on the down. They lost all 5 starters from last year. Oklahoma State loses 2 or 3 starters and will be without Jeffrey Carroll, who's their best player for some time. The Big 12 is not as good as it has been in years past, and TCU is one of the few teams on the up. You look around the conference, teams like Oklahoma and maybe Texas are probably the only other teams I can think of that are also trending in the right direction in that conference.
All right. Well, thank you, Ben. As the college football season draws to a close in January, we will be turning more of our attention to college basketball as a whole, but especially TCU basketball. The Horned Frogs on the court still have the bulk of their season left, but the Horned Frogs on the football field do not, as they hit the road and take on Texas Tech in Lubbock at 11 a.m. on Fox Sports 1 on Saturday. We'll preview that one and the rest of the college football matchups coming up right after this.
I have an eating disorder. People of all sizes struggle with disordered eating. Eating disorders affect people of every age, race, gender, and socioeconomic status. Eating disorders do not discriminate. Get the help you need now before it's too late.
When I grow up, I want to be a new pair of blue jeans.
When I grow up, I want to be a kid's first computer.
I want to be a warm fleece on a cold day.
I want to be a football
I want to
stadium.
be a bike that races around the country.
I want to be a bench on a forest trail.
When I grow up, I don't want to be a piece of garbage. And if you recycle me, I won't be.
Give your garbage another life. Recycle. Learn how at iwanttoberecycled.org. Brought to you by Keep America Beautiful and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to KTCU and Friday Night Sports. It's TCU at Texas Tech. They hit the road this weekend to go to Lubbock. Guys, the Horned Frogs will be entering a tough road environment against the Red Raiders this weekend. What will TCU need to do on Saturday morning in order to leave Lubbock with a win, keep their Big 12 title hopes still alive?
I'll start with something they didn't do last week that has got to get a lot better. TCU must tackle well in space. Oklahoma had some explosive plays, some big plays. TCU, usually a very good tackling team. I think of guys like Traven Howard and Nico Small, who were very good tacklers in space. You could add Nick Orr to that conversation. they've got to do a better job than that. This is a rhythm offense for Texas Tech. What I mean by that is quarterback Nick Shimanek will make a lot of short, easy throws into space. Texas Tech, as always, has a bunch of athletes that can do a lot of damage on the outside. They put you in tough situations. They're pretty much a typical Big 12 offense in that sense. How you stop them, you tackle in space, and you don't let them get chunk plays. They don't really run the ball, so screens and dump-offs are an extension of their running game, so you have to tackle well in space. Texas Tech will put you in a lot of one-on-ones on the outside. The corners in the secondary, even the linebackers in that sense, will have to do a better job than they did against Oklahoma.
One thing for me, big thing to look at going forward is who's going to be the quarterback for this game. Gary Patterson said that Kenny Hill he's probable to questionable. So if we don't see him, we're most likely going to see Sean Robinson, true freshman, great prospect coming out of DeSoto, Texas, led his team to a state championship his senior year. But, we haven't really seen much of him. He came in late in the game against Jackson State. It's a lower FCS school, so it's hard to gauge. He did get a couple plays in against Oklahoma. Hard to judge there as well because there's only a couple snaps. But it'll be interesting to see going forward, especially in this game. If Sean Robinson comes out, how is he going to be able to handle that pressure of right now one of TCU's bigger games? Because if they don't win this, they're not going to be able to get the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, Ben, to your point, the Texas Tech offense really this year has moved to a dump and dump off scheme this year, really running a lot of screens and giving the ball to Kiki Cutie or Dylan Cantrell and letting them do the work. They're not as explosive as they have been in the past. Certainly we remember the Mike Leach era days, and of course he took those to Washington State, and we see those today. But and as for Mitch, I think this quarterback situation really complicates things for Texas Tech, because I question whether or how much Kenny Hill is really hurt. I'm not saying he isn't injured, but this could be a really good tactic used by Gary Patterson to leave the door open for Sean Robinson to get some playing time. And he's not going to have a lot of film. As you said, he doesn't have much game experience. So Texas Tech really doesn't have a lot to work with. They can look at his high school film, but that only takes it so far when he's in a completely different offense here at TCU.
Yeah, it was an undisclosed injury, if I'm not mistaken, for Kenny Hill. So, that certainly could very well be true what you're saying, James. If it is, props to Gary Patterson. It's a great idea. This Texas Tech defense has enough problems as it is. Not knowing what quarterback you're going to be facing would be another challenge in and of itself. But moving past that, regardless of who's at quarterback, it's Kenny Hill or Sean Robinson. I know Darius Anderson's out, but you've got to get Kyle Hicks the ball, take pressure off of Kenny Hill, who isn't great as just a guy who's going to throw 45 to 50 passes in a game, and Sean Robinson, who's a redshirt freshman who has very little, has hardly any really game experience. You've got to have a running game in this one if you're going to be successful. It's what TCU did early on. Kyle Hicks he's a good running back. He's quick. He likes to get into space if he can. He's productive out there. He can also catch the ball out of the backfield. He must play a role in this game. And if you're TCU offensively, get back to what you did early on. Be positive but simple on early downs. That's what Kenny Hill was so good at the beginning of the season, why TCU started off 8-0. Get yourself into third and manageable. You do that by not beating yourself, shooting yourself in the foot with penalties. If TCU can do that, Kenny Hill, Sean Robinson, I think they'll convert in these third and manageable opportunities because, like I said, Texas Tech's defense isn't great, but it's getting to that point. That's what made TCU so good at the beginning of the season and so tough to stop offensively. It's what they've gotten away from in the past couple of weeks, whether it was Iowa State a couple of weeks ago or Oklahoma this past weekend. TCU must get back to that if they're going to get back to winning ways.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Ben, the TCU offense, they really got to step back up with the running game. Kyle Hicks, he's a really solid running back for us last year, good at running and catching. And even with Darius Anderson out, you've still got guys like Kennedy Snell, who still hasn't really played much. He's a true freshman. He's quick. He can get into space. You also got to think of Sewo Lanalua, with Hicks and Anderson at the beginning of the season being the two main backs. He would come in, shorter opportunities, goal line. I think, he shouldn't be your main back going forward in this game, but I think you could give him the ball a bit more. He's he's big. He's pretty quick. He's still pretty quick as well. Really pound the defense early on the ground and open up some lanes or some passing opportunities for either Kenny Hill or Sean Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, someone's going to have to spell Kyle Hicks. He's been doing much of the spelling for Darius Anderson over the course of the season. Now, obviously, like with Darius Anderson out, somebody's going to have to give Kyle Hicks a break. I think Alonzo is capable of it, like you said, Mitch. We'll see how that plans out, though.
Yeah, certainly. As TCU has really adopted the running back by committee this year, mainly between Kyle Hicks and Darius Anderson. And when you lose half of that, as Gary Patterson said this week, it's time for someone to step up. And the thing with Sewo Olonilua is, yes, he's big. Yes, he's physical. The only thing is that you pretty much know what you're going to get with him, and it's going to be straight up the middle. So I'll be interested to see how they use him. I would think he's a little more versatile than just running the ball up the middle. But we'll have to see. And Kennedy Snell is certainly really shifty, really quick when he gets out. So I'll, again, see if they use him maybe as a receiver or more of a receiving back. It's an interesting it's a plot for Gary Patterson that he's going to have to solve. As for the TCU defense, this is not going to be the same game as last year, especially since Texas Tech doesn't have Patrick Mahomes. I think the defense can really hold its head high after their second-half performance last week at Oklahoma. We'll see what the injuries are like on Saturday morning, but I think this is a great opportunity for TCU to regain some confidence on defense and show why they're still one of the top defenses in the country.
Yeah, I mean, they have their work cut out for them because TCU and Gary Patterson's defense in the past has prided themselves on stopping the run. Unfortunately for Texas Tech, that's not really what they're worried about or focused on offensively. They're more of a passing team, and the secondary got exposed a little bit last week against Oklahoma. It's been exposed in a couple other games, I know, albeit against some great quarterbacks and guys like Mason Rudolph and Will Grier, but it's an interesting matchup because TCU has got a lot to prove, and the injuries don't help. But if TCU does come out and play well, I would be very impressed, and I would give a lot of credit to Gary Patterson for his ability to prepare this team and execute a game plan to stop Texas Tech, because they certainly don't really have the personnel to play Texas Tech's kind of game.
Yeah, with the TCU, the secondary and the passing game for Texas Tech, TCU secondary they've been hit hard by good passing games so far in the season. But they've been able to survive that in some cases. But what they're not the best at is when a team can run the ball and pass the ball pretty well, like Oklahoma did. But then going to the other side of the ball, Red Raider defense, they are last in the Big 12 in third down defense. TCU, they're still fifth in the nation on third down offense. So that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle for this weekend coming up. Getting third down conversions, staying on the offense for TCU, or keeping the offense on the field for TCU. Yeah,
the Texas Tech defense is usually not very good. They have improved over the past few years, and part of that is because they've kept the defensive coordinator for more than one season, and they get some consistency there with defensive coordinator David Gibbs, and his big philosophy has been to limit the big plays and keep the gains to short yardage gains. They allowed just 253 total yards to Baylor last week, which is much improvement over past years. And Texas Tech has better talent this season. They aren't giving up those big plays. And really, I think that plays into their hands because TCU is not a big play team. They maybe rattle off one or two, especially through the air. But mainly their bigger plays are going to come on the ground. So I think really for Texas Tech, their number one problem to solve or number one thing to look for is this run game. Can we force Kenny Hill to be uncomfortable and throw the ball more than he wants to? And if they can do that and really bottle up the run game, they'll have a good shot. But for TCU, yet again, another a tough road game, this one early too. So we'll see how the time, the 11 a.m. start kind of plays into it. I think they've only had one this season, and that got rained on and pushed to like a 2:30 start. So, yet again, another tough road game.
Yeah, and AT&T Field's not an easy place to play. Texas Tech always seems like they have a pretty sizable home field advantage. They they do a great job of feeding off the crowd and things like that. So it's certainly a hostile environment, a tough place to play. If you remember the last time TCU went there, it was that insane ending of the game when Aaron Green caught that tip pass on 4th down and 2 right on the goal line. TCU kept. I think at that point they might have been unbeaten at that point. I don't remember. It was an important game for TCU in the same sense. It's an important game for Horned Frogs as well to bounce back and keep themselves in Big 12 championship contention.
Yeah, I think if you're a player, you got to watch out for the flying tortillas because don't they throw tortillas on the field?
Yeah, and I think Gary Patterson's gotten hit with a couple of water bottles the past couple years he's been there. Like I said, it's a hostile environment, not an easy place to play.
Yeah, watch out for the dust storms and the tortillas and the water bottles, and maybe you'll escape Lubbock alive. So
there's a lot going on in a town that isn't very big.
Yeah, certainly not much there. So I've been told, and hopefully I don't have to take my travels out there anytime soon. But we'll transition into our last segment. It is time for the pick'em. Ben is sitting at 34-21. He 3-2 last week. Mitch at 36-19, 2-3 last week, and I'm also 36-19, 4-1 last week. Ben with just 2 games back, a little bit of ground to make up. We'll start with Michigan at number 8, Wisconsin. Michigan's won their last 3 games, albeit against sub 500 teams, by at least 21 points. Is there any way we see an upset in Camp Randall this weekend?
Michigan, they've done a lot better this past couple of weeks, like you said, against sub 500 teams. But they've got a different quarterback in their system right now. Maybe starting to figure things out a bit better on the offensive side of the ball. And on the other side, Wisconsin, they are undefeated. They are ranked number 5. Haven't had the biggest test this season, but I think at home, Wisconsin, they're going to be too tough to handle for Michigan. I've got Wisconsin in this one.
Yeah, I've got some ground to make up and running low on time. So give me not the Badgers, give me the Wolverines. Here's why. I understand Wisconsin gets another top 25 matchup to improve their subpar resume, but to be quite honest with you, I'm not sold on Wisconsin quite yet. It seems like all their big games have come at home. This one will as well, but they haven't really been tested all that much this year. They aren't very proven offensively. They're one-dimensional. Jonathan Taylor's an outstanding freshman running back. He's got a bright future ahead of him. But Alex Hornibrook's been inconsistent offensively. Michigan, on the other hand, is stout up front. They have a really good rush defense. If they can contain Jonathan Taylor, force Alex Hornibrook to beat them, Michigan's got a real shot. It also looks like Michigan's found a quarterback. Sophomore Brandon Peters isn't turning the ball over, which is job number 1 right now for Jim Harbaugh's offense because it's something they've struggled with the past couple of years. He's also been pretty effective through the air. Not great by any stretch of the imagination, but like I said, he's not turning the ball over. It'll be really tough for the Wolverines in Camp Randall, but give me Michigan in an upset to knock off the unbeaten Wisconsin Badgers.
Yeah, I think Michigan has to have a lot of things go right for them to beat Wisconsin. Wisconsin's defense is very good, quite possibly one of the best in the country. And when a team has a good defense, their offense can usually do enough to get wins. The key for Michigan is to force turnovers. Wisconsin has let opposing teams score 20 times, and of those 20 times, 8 came off turnovers. Since Brandon Peters, as Ben mentioned, he took over at quarterback, the Michigan offense has been more efficient, but for me, I think there's still too many question marks surrounding the rest of that offense for me. Jonathan Taylor, he's on the Heisman running or the Heisman watch this year. I think he could certainly be there the next couple of years. I think Wisconsin's going to pull away late and get the win at home. As for our next matchup, it was a rough afternoon for the Bulldogs last week at Auburn. They will enjoy the comforts of home at Sanford Stadium this weekend while facing a 7-3 Kentucky team. Can Georgia rebound this weekend, or will they drop 2 in a row?
Like you said, Georgia, they're going to be at home while they are coming off a tough loss. Again, at home, it's going to be a nice, welcoming environment. It's going to be really tough for Kentucky. I think Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel are going to be 2 of the bigger rebounders in this game. I think they're going to really dominate on the ground. Jake Fromm, again, he's been pretty solid all year. I think he's going to stay solid as well. And I've got the Bulldogs at home.
Yeah, hot take. You guys ready for this? Kentucky actually has the better running back in this game, in my opinion. Sophomore Benny Snell is a stud. He's been a 1,000-yard rusher his first 2 years on campus in Lexington. Unfortunately for Kentucky, they don't have the defensive front Auburn had last week, and they can't contain this Georgia rushing attack. You mentioned Sonny Michel, Nick Chubb, added DeAndre Swift, who's a true freshman. He looks really good. It's just too much for Georgia. I think they'll bounce back, and they'll cruise to a win over Kentucky.
And Nick Chubb just needs 106 more yards to join Herschel Walker as the only Georgia players to have 3 seasons with 1,000 yards on the ground. I don't know if he'll get it this weekend, but he should certainly get it by the end of the season. Among numerous things that went wrong for Georgia last week, the big takeaway from me was that they could not get their run game going. The engine for Georgia's offense is that run game. Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel combined for just 48 yards and 1 touchdown. It was not an average day for them. And when you force Jake Fromm to throw the ball, which Auburn did, he's more uncomfortable and he's not very consistent. Again, he's young, so I think that's going to come. And the other thing I noticed was that the Dogs could not stop the Auburn run game. Kerryon Johnson had a monster day with 167 yards on the ground, and the team totaled 237 yards rushing. The key for Georgia will be to stop Kentucky's Benny Snell, as Ben just mentioned, and Saheem King from running all over them and force Steven Johnson to throw the ball. I think they do that, and Georgia gets the win at home. Notre Dame had a tough road loss last week as well down in Miami. They host a Navy team this week who put over 500 yards on the ground against SMU. Notre Dame had trouble stopping the run last week. Can they get back on the winning track this week, or does Navy run right through the Notre Dame defense?
Like you said, Notre Dame, tough weekend last week on the road. This week, they're at home. They're going to be nice and comfortable in their home stadium. And, I think they're going to be able to prepare well against the run. Navy, it's a triple option. They could pretty much focus on just defending the run. And I think, with Notre Dame being back home, they're going to get the win.
Yeah, you make a good point. Notre Dame plays a lot better in South Bend. I worry, though, about the Irish's motivation in this game with them now being out of the playoff contention, or if they aren't, there's really only a slim chance that they'll make the college football playoff. That being said, Notre Dame wins, but it's close.
Yeah, Notre Dame, as we've mentioned, is a very run-heavy team, and as I said earlier in the show, Brandon Wimbush is not the most consistent passing quarterback. Navy handles the run very well, so I would expect to see Notre Dame be more pass-happy on Saturday. As for Navy, they're going to be without Zach Abey, which shouldn't pose too much of a problem since Malcolm Perry had a great first game, although in his one passing attempt he threw an interception. Navy's going to have to find a way to run the ball effectively. Miami took advantage of the Notre Dame turnovers last week. Navy could do the same thing, but if they can just continue to throw runners at the linemen, they could wear them down. I think it helps this game is in South Bend, in a close game, though, I like Notre Dame. And ever since the incredible 34-point comeback against Texas A&M, UCLA has gone 4-5 and has yet to win a road game this season. Does that change this week as they face their crosstown rival?
Look, it's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. USC, they've obviously been the much better team this season. But the Trojan secondary, they haven't been the best. Against earlier in the season against Washington State, they gave up 340 yards to Luke Falk, and last week Colorado's Steven Montez threw for 376 yards and 2 touchdowns. And while Josh Rosen might not be what a lot of people thought he would be, I think he's going to put up some big numbers in the passing game. And while the UCLA defense isn't that great, and Ronald Jones will have a fantastic game, I think. Because of the rivalry and the different atmosphere, I've got the Bruins.
Yeah, UCLA doesn't have a chance. This USC offense is playing outstanding. They look unstoppable. Like Mitch said, the play of Ronald Jones has been huge, giving them some balance offensively. And because of that, Sam Darnold's thrown just 1 interception in his last 3 games after starting the season with 9 in his first 7 or something like that. This offense scores instead of giving the ball to the other team, plain and simple. I think because of that, Trojans win big.
Yeah, this has definitely been a bit of an underwhelming season for USC after coming into the season with high college football playoff hopes. But they find themselves in 11th, and if they end up winning the Pac-12, they could still find themselves playing on New Year's Day. Ever since that loss to Notre Dame, USC has played a lot better, and that includes Sam Darnold, thrown 7 touchdowns, and as you said, just 1 interception in those last 3 games. And UCLA has given up an average 545 yards per game in November alone. UCLA's defense just has a lot of problems. and they're not very good. And USC's playing better as of late. I also like USC in a big home win. And as for our last pick'em, much like the other top 6 teams last weekend, TCU did not fare well on the road and dropped their second game of the season. We know how explosive the Tech offense is, but their defense has improved over the last couple of years. Can Texas Tech pull off the upset and force TCU out of the Big 12 championship game?
As we mentioned earlier in our preview, TCU, it's going to be tough, not knowing or not completely knowing who their quarterback is going to be, plus a couple guys questionable on defense. But, with all that in mind, I think TCU, while it is going to be tough on the road, like we've said before, Gary Patterson likes to play on the road, and I've got the Horned Frogs.
Yeah, we talked about that home field advantage that Texas Tech's enjoyed at AT&T Field. I don't really see that as much from this Red Raiders team this year. They've struggled at home in games they probably shouldn't have struggled that much in. I think Kansas State overtime loss. And even more so, that was also an 11 a.m. start time. It's not prime time. That's really where this crowd gets into it, and Texas Tech really plays their best football, at least from what I've seen over the past couple of years. In addition to that, this game doesn't have that level of big-time upset that we thought it could have, and I think that Texas Tech and Coach Cliff Kingsbury could really feed off of. Because of that, Gary Patterson will prepare this group well defensively. The offense will do enough, not shoot themselves in the foot. I think the Horned Frogs bounce back.
Yeah, I think the injuries are going to play a part in this game for TCU. As I said earlier, I'm not sure how bad or badly Kenny Hill is injured, and if it is, if it really isn't hurt, but more of a tactic by Gary Patterson. Huge props to him. As for Texas Tech, they're a pretty good three-quarter team. Nick Shimanek is fourth in the country in passing yards, and Kiki Cutie is fifth nationally in receiving yards. So, as usual, Tech has no problem throwing the ball. Their fourth quarter problems, though, have caused them to lose games. They're outscored in the fourth quarter and in overtime, something like 60 or 70 points to 14. So really not playing good fourth quarter football. I go back to the West Virginia loss, giving up 22 points in the fourth quarter alone and having no response for them. The Tech defense has gotten better with their defensive coordinator staying for a couple of years. I think TCU is going to win this game, but it's going to be closer than people think. And with that will bring this week's episode of Friday Night Sports to a close. As always, you can find our episodes later on in the week on YouTube at Friday Night Sports and our Facebook page, also creatively named Friday Night Sports. Thank you for listening, and for Ben Otten and Mitchell LaFave, I'm James Flowers. Good night, everyone.